10th of August, 1519, the fleet, with everything necessary on board, announced its departure from the port of Seville with a salvo. On the 20th of September, we left Sanlúcar, sailing southwest, and on the 26th, we reached one of the Canary Islands, called Tenerife. We stopped there for 3 days to take on meat, water, and firewood.
After leaving the Canary Islands, Magellan followed a rather strange route, hugging the African coast. That, together with the tensions that had already arisen between the Spanish captains and Magellan, made people afraid that Magellan was heading to a Portuguese colony in Africa.
The relationship between Magellan and Elcano initially seems to be cordial. This relationship will gradually become more difficult once they set sail.
Magellan had to inform all the captains of the ships of the route they were going to follow. And he didn't.
Cartagena asked him, "Have you changed course? Why? Where are we heading?"
Magellan knew how to avoid calm conditions and find the winds he needed to take him to the coast of Brazil. It's clear that here Juan de Cartagena tried to demonstrate some control over Magellan, telling him that that wasn't the route to follow. And on the other hand, Magellan feels the need to retain his authority and impose his orders. Following the king's orders, the captains of the ships were forced to salute the flagship at the end of the day.
One calm day, a sailor on Cartagena's vessel was given the job of saluting Magellan. Magellan did not like being saluted by a mere sailor, and so he sent a message to Juan de Cartagena ordering the Spaniard himself to salute Magellan and address him as Captain General. Cartagena responded that he had sent the best sailor on his ship to salute him, and that perhaps another day he would be saluted by a ship's boy. And so he refused to salute him again for 3 days.
That voyage took 75 days approximately, from the Canary Islands to Brazil.
A bay of calm waters, paradisaical, of an extremely intense green color.
Here we stocked up on many hens, potatoes, sugarcane, and meat. We bartered things to our advantage. For a hook or a knife, they gave us 5 or 6 hens. For a comb, 2 geese. For a small mirror, enough fish for 10 people to eat.
They had enjoyed Brazil a lot, but they sailed on towards the south. It had been 8 months since they had left Seville.
They kept following South America's coastline, which they did know from the expedition of Juan Díaz de Solís, until they got to the La Plata River. From there on, the coast they would find was unknown. At that point, they were entering an untraveled part of the map. There were a lot of inlets, and each cape, each bay had to be explored in detail in case it was the passage that they were looking for. The weather was getting worse and worse. The austral winter was setting in. And Magellan decided to stop at a natural harbor he found, and which he named Puerto San Julian.
Seeing that the sailing would go on for a long time, Magellan ordered that the food be distributed carefully so it would last longer. It was very cold, and there was no hope of finding the end of that dry land, nor the passage to the other sea they were seeking. Being so hungry and cold, it was impossible to go for much longer with the food rationing that had been imposed. The sailors begged him to go back, and to be satisfied with having reached where no mortal had dared to. But Magellan told them something. That he was determined to die before sailing back to Spain in disgrace.
They were entering seas no one had ever sailed before. That must have caused a lot of anxiety and stress in the crew.
Being on a ship in the middle of the sea is like being inside an eggshell, and that makes bad tempers and friction more frequent.
Elcano, as Grand Master of the Concepcion, positioned himself against Magellan, supporting the proposals of Cartagena, Quesada, etc.
Magellan, not following any strategy, open to animosity, had removed Juan de Cartagena from his position as captain. Cartagena was very upset, and from then on he was waiting for the chance to get revenge.
Magellan stayed at Port San Julian for a lengthy period of time, 148 days. The crew didn't understand why they were staying there for so long.
There were more and more doubts about Magellan's ability to lead such a long voyage.
The captains of the other 4 ships plotted to kill Captain Magellan. The plot was uncovered. One man ended up dismembered and another stabbed.
Elcano supported Juan de Cartagena and the rebels, and Magellan wanted Elcano to be hung together with 40 more men. He didn't hang that many because he wouldn't have had enough crew.
Magellan had no power to kill Juan de Cartagena because, due to his social status, only the king could order his execution. But it was proved that he couldn't be trusted either. Cartagena and the bishop on the expedition were arrested and finally left to their devices on an island. And this was Magellan's main message for everyone. He had reached his limit, and from that moment on, he couldn't allow people not to follow the orders which King Carlos V himself had given him. The aims of that voyage and his authority, granted by the king, couldn't be compromised.
Another misfortune befell us there. The Santiago, which had sailed ahead toward shore to scout the area, was wrecked on a shoal. All the crew miraculously survived, however. The crew stayed at the shipwreck for 2 months to salvage the wreckage and the goods that the sea tossed up on the beach from time to time.
The Santiago's crew was assigned to the remaining ships. The 4 vessels continued sailing.
Many days had passed, but oddly enough, it took only 2 days to find a cape, which they named 11,000 Virgins Cape. They didn't know it, but this cape was the beginning of the Strait of Magellan.
Not knowing what it was we were entering, we sailed 5 leagues up it until nightfall. The crew firmly believed that the strait had no exit to the west.
In the strait, the currents are really strong, full of twists and turns, of islands, of channels. It's extremely difficult. The weather is unstable, very inhospitable. Strong winds start blowing very quickly. Halfway up the strait, they found a fork, and it wasn't at all clear which of the 2 routes was the right one to take. So he sent an advance party composed of 2 ships, the San Antonio and the Concepcion.
The pilot of the San Antonio took advantage of the dark of night to turn back. They chained and even wounded the captain of the ship. And that's how they headed back to Spain. Then Captain General Magellan gave orders to look for them everywhere.
It was too late. The San Antonio was far away, so they had no choice but to continue.
The sailors on the reconnaissance boat came back on the 3rd day, and told us that they had seen the cape where the strait ended, and a big sea could be seen, an ocean. We all burst into tears of joy, and very soon we named it the Pacific Ocean.
The Pacific Ocean was something unknown. That was why Magellan wanted to find a new route. The expedition, which had been launched for an important financial reason, then became a scientific expedition, as many new things were being discovered. It was, in fact, an adventure in the end.
Sailing across the Pacific began when they reached the end of the Strait of Magellan. Once there, Magellan quickly set sail northbound, trying to leave that place that was so cold and inhospitable, in search of areas that had better weather.
They found themselves firstly without enough food, because the ship that had deserted them, the San Antonio, was, you could say, the larder ship that supplied the others. When it deserted and sailed back to Spain, it left them with scarcely any food, very limited at that point.
The water we were forced to drink was putrid and stank. Very often, the only food we had to eat was sawdust. Even rats, so disgusting to men, became such an expensive delicacy that each one went for half a ducat. We were faced with the ordeal of having to eat the pieces of leather that covered the main mast. Besides the dead, there were sick sailors whose arms, legs, and other parts of their bodies ached.
Besides, they describe how they have a disease in their mouths that makes their gums grow and their teeth fall out. Scurvy.
We know that after 1 month, 2 months of sailing, when they reached the equatorial calm with high temperatures, all the fresh food they had on board, the vegetables and fruits, were practically rotten.
We sailed for 3 months and 20 days with no fresh food to eat. I do not think any person in the future will venture to set off on a similar journey. And then a man on the topsail cried, "Land! Land!" We were all so happy that we thought mad the person who least showed his joy.
After a long time sailing across the Pacific, they finally reached the Isle of Guam, which they named the Isle of Thieves.
Magellan wanted to stop to take on provisions, but that was not possible because the islanders would come on board our ships and rob us, and we were unable to stop them.
Ferdinand Magellan realized he had to show his authority with some sort of retaliation.
Then the captain, furious, went ashore with a group of armed men. They burnt down 40 or 50 houses, as well as many of their canoes, and killed 7 men.
Seeing that the situation was unsustainable, they decided to keep sailing, although they were able to get refreshed, that is, get fresh food, as that was the term used back then.
If one looks at their route, you might think that Magellan wanted to take a detour from the past to the Moluccas, and intended to first look for other regions he might have heard of, where there might be other islands where he could make some kind of profit for himself or his descendants. And they hear of a city called Cebu. They even received help to get there.
When he saw Cebu, with such lush vegetation, so much greenery, and he saw that the natives, especially the kings, wore gold necklaces around their necks, thick gold necklaces, he said, "This is where I want to stay."
Magellan sent one of his assistants with Enrique, the interpreter, as ambassador to talk to the king of Cebu. When they arrived in the village, they found a king surrounded by a crowd, frightened by the sound of the barrage. The interpreter began by calming down the king, telling him that it was our custom, and that the din was nothing but a friendly salutation of peace to honor the king, as well as the island. That put everyone at ease.